Shalom, and welcome back to my home, my 900-year-old house in the old city of Jerusalem. I was telling you my story, which I'm calling the long and winding road, quite long and quite winding. Where I left off was, after spending a year in India, I came back and finished my degree at Brandeis University. And then I joined an ashram in the woods of Massachusetts, a mile and a half from the ocean, a beautiful place called Vedanta Center Ananda Ashram, America's oldest ashram. And I stayed there for 15 years. So, of course, you're wondering, why did I stay there for 15 years? That's a long time. I was a monastic member of a community. The community was a small community. We had maybe 10 or 11 monastic members, and then we had what we called householder devotees we had meditation classes on Thursday nights, and on Sunday mornings we had, in the Temple of the Universal Spirit, we had lectures on Vedanta philosophy. During the 15 years, we had another ashram, a much larger one in California, and also 2 branches in India. And our guru, as I said, was an Indian woman. Her name was Srimata Gayatri Devi. We called her Mataji. She was 64 years old when I entered the ashram. And she used to travel from one ashram to the other. And when she was absent, I was teaching meditation and Vedanta philosophy. And the community, it's interesting because she was the guru of Timothy Leary, who was he was called the high priest of LSD. He was the one who made drugs and LSD as a mind-altering experience, who made them famous in America in the 60s. And at one point, Mataji, the guru, said to him, "Tim, you can't have it both ways. You have to choose one or the other. It's drugs or meditation." And he chose drugs. And when he left and he founded Millbrook, which was a community, of people who used drugs for mind-expanding experiences. When he left being Mataji's disciple, he took almost all the monastic community of the 60s with him. So when I arrived in June of 1970, there were only like 2 people there as monastic members. One was Marguerite, a retired psychiatric nurse from Switzerland. And the other was Brother Richard, who at the age of, in the 70s, he took care of the grounds and he was still climbing trees and had this big organic vegetable garden. Anyway, so you're wondering why I stayed there for 15 years. As I stayed there, more and more young people came and the community grew, but it was never big because we weren't flashy. My guru was very, very particular not to have any psychic ingredient in our spiritual worldview. We followed the teachings of someone, a Bengali saint from the 19th century called Sri Ramakrishna, and he said that if you had even one of the 8 psychic powers, you will never achieve God consciousness, which was really the goal. And contrast this with many of the gurus who came to America in the 60s and 70s and 80s who had psychic powers and who attracted people based on their psychic powers. But our guru would have none of it, and this is such an important point because people are so impressed by psychic powers. And it's not the way to God. It's not the way to God consciousness. It's not the way. Psychic powers always end up feeding the ego, which is the opposite of the path that takes you to God consciousness. Anyway, why did I stay for 15 years? So what was life at the ashram like? We meditated 3 times a day. We weren't like the Buddhists who would sit with very straight backs on their cushions and meditate for an hour at a time. No, our meditation was like 20 to 30 minutes, 3 times a day. And then we had this large organic vegetable garden. where we grew vegetables for the whole year. It was Massachusetts, so we froze vegetables for the winter. We also had flower gardens. We had a publishing department, which I was in charge. And we had retreat cottages. So people would come from outside and they would stay for a weekend or a week or most 2 weeks in order to just retreat, to meditate. And so we had a lot going on. And we had all these people, the devotees, the householder devotees who came. And so a lot going on in the community. The community was about developing yourself spiritually in several ways. One was meditation. And I want to say about meditation, because meditation is a wonderful thing, and it really enables you to quiet the mind. And I recommend it. And yes, I still practice meditation, Jewish meditation. But I found over 15 years of meditating, that we would say that after the whole Tim Leary experience, we would say, well, drugs, your mind goes, you go up and you get high and you go down. I found meditation was the same way. I had some very high meditations where I really experienced the oneness behind all reality. But I remember one of my most searing experiences. I had one of the highest meditations of my life. I was leading meditation for the group in the group place where we meditated. And I got so high, I really got there. And so I was so long lost in my higher consciousness that the other members of the community left and went to have breakfast, and just left me there because I was just like, it was hard to come down. It was hard to come down into the physical body. I really experienced the oneness behind all reality. When I finally came down, and I waved the incense in the different places you're supposed to wave the incense. And then I was putting away, we had like prayer shawls called chadar that we wore. I was putting away my prayer shawl in the chadar room. My best friend, Sister Barda, came up to me to ask me. I was the senior sister, so I was in charge of the schedule. So she came up to me to ask me, she wanted to change the cooking schedule. And I yelled at her, what are you doing bothering me? I'm here was in this high state of consciousness, and you're bothering me, you're bringing me down. Well, that was a real learning experience. Because if we achieve higher consciousness, we should be kinder, more patient, more loving to everyone around us, not more angry. Truthfully, and I see that one story leads to another, so just flow with me. When I was in India that year, I wrote a research paper on the meaning of Eastern spirituality and the Western mind. And I went to the ashram in Haridwar, or was it Rishikesh? It was in Rishikesh, where the Beatles had been. I wasn't staying there, I was staying somewhere else. But I wanted to see it and get some sense of what was going on there. Now they had dozens of people coming from the West. This was 1969. And I somehow walked in to the ashram of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And because I had white skin, they thought I was one of the paying guests, I suppose, and I got in. And I started interviewing the people who were there for my research paper. And the head Swami, the assistant, second one to the guru, he somehow was told about a stranger who was there interviewing the other people. And he came rushing toward me angrily. What are you doing here? I'm just here, interviewing. No, you don't belong here, and get out. And I said, there's something very wrong with this scene. If he is the head Swami in charge and he is so angry, this is not spiritual attainment. I found out that meditation, after 15 years of meditation, it also did not lead to the highest goal. The highest goal that I was aiming for was God consciousness. But I saw that it went up and down. And that was a problem. But how did it work at the ashram? So we had a community. And Mataji, our guru, used to say that the friction in the community rubbed off the rough edges. She purposely engendered friction in the community. Because here we were living with people not of our own choosing. These were people very different background from me. And these were people not of my own choosing. And very different personalities. I was really the only Jewish one. I came from, as you know, a middle-class Jewish background. All the other people there had come from Christian backgrounds. So Mataji, as I said, engendered the friction purposely. If somebody had a tendency toward jealousy, she would purposely say things or do things that would make that person jealous of someone else. She did it on purpose. She used to say that you have to boil the pot in order to for the impurities to rise to the surface so you could skim them off. So it was really a process of working on oneself. And I promised you that to give you a practical tool in each one of these recordings or broadcasts. So the practical tool this time is you have to work on yourself. That is the beginning of all personal and spiritual development. You have to work on yourself. Now, it's very tricky when we use the word self, because this is the I generation, the iPod, the iPad, the emphasis of I, me, mine. This is not the self we're talking about. That's the ego self. And the ego self is up to about self-aggrandizement. I want to be more important. I want to be richer. I want to have a bigger house, fancier car. I mean, all the, material things, but also like ego gratification, status. And the self that I'm talking about is the higher self. What we talked about last week, last recording, the soul. The soul, the higher self, is really at odds with that lower self or the ego self, because the ego self always wants to be a taker. And the higher self, the more you develop the higher self, the more you become a giver. So they're really at odds with each other, but you have to start with working on the I, on the higher self. I'll tell you at another time, how I wanted to save the world when I was a freshman and sophomore in college. I was a member, very active politically. We see in the political realm, and this, from within the walls, this YouTube channel will not deal with politics. That's a promise. But the point I'm trying to make is that we see people in politics who have very high ideals, but they haven't worked on themselves. They have that still such ego and such that ends up with anger and self-aggrandizement and putting other people down and all these things. So no matter how high your ideals are, no matter how much you want to help the world, you have to start with working on the self, the higher self. Not as it's not a selfish endeavor. It's the beginning of a hierarchical process. We start working on the self. Where Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of actually pre-state Israel, he talked about concentric circles. I think that's better than like this. You start with the self. And then when you've gotten to a stage of development of loving yourself, because you have to love yourself. And again, I'm not talking about the ego. I'm talking about the higher self. The basic thing to know about your soul is that that's your essential identity, and that you are created by God, and you are connected to God, and you are beloved by God. You have to know that. And the next stage out is your family. You have to love your family. If you're at odds with your parents, with your spouse, with your children, with your sisters and brothers, there's something very wrong. First, you connect to yourself in a deep and loving way. And then you connect to your family in a deep and loving way. And then you go on to connect to the next level out, which if you're a Jew is the Jewish people. Because people say, I love all humanity, but they certainly don't love the 12 million Jews in the world. Again, you can't skip any level. It goes out gradually. So, and after you love the Jewish people, you love all humanity, says Rav Kook, and then you love all sentient beings. That's when you really start caring about the whales in a pure and holy way. Okay, thank you for joining me today, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I look forward to continuing my story next time. Also, I want to tell you that on Sunday, which I think is March 13th, and I have no idea when you're going to be watching this. You could be watching this in April or May or June. But if you're watching it soon after I record it, which I'm recording today is March 8th. On March 8th is when I'm recording this. So this coming Sunday, which is March 13th, is my father's yahrzeit. That means the anniversary of his death. And I'm going to be giving a live class. And I'm inviting you all to come and join me live. It'll be at 5 o'clock in the afternoon here in Israel and at 10 o'clock in the morning, East Coast time in America, 7 o'clock in the morning for you Californians, but okay, you can listen to the recording. Okay, have a great day. Thanks for joining me.